All right, I think we're ready. So welcome, everyone. My name is Alex Săvescu, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to administer your project server instance. A little bit about myself. I've been with Microsoft for 8 years now. I came from UMT through the acquisition that was actually announced 8 years ago at the project conference in 2005. I don't know how many of you remember that time. And since I joined Microsoft, I worked on a bunch of demand management and portfolio features in 2007 and 2010, and then moved on to server features, such as reporting or administration in general. And now I'm responsible for the back end of Project Online and Project Server, all the things that are under the covers. So how many of you are SharePoint admins? Okay, quite a few people. How many of you are IT admins? You know, handle servers or DBs, or okay. Some of you are both. Do you manage Office 365 tenancies or Project Online? Well, not many. All right, so I can get started then. So I'm excited to be talking to you here because, as I said, at Microsoft, I manage the project service, and my job is to make sure that our Project Online tenancies and our service runs smoothly in the data center. So my target audience are ourselves, because we get to be the on-call engineers. We get a call when things go wrong online, or our ops team, which pretty much translates to you guys, the SharePoint admins, that have to manage your deployment. So I'm going to talk about what the Office 365 role means. That's kind of a new role that we added in 365. I'm going to talk about SharePoint PMO type of administration, and how we made it easier in 2013 to manage Project Server, and I'll talk why things were hard and how things got better. Then I'll move on to manage, and how does it all work, how project instances and the queue and a little bit of architecture works, and how we could administer it through PowerShell, and in the end, about monitoring and diagnosis. A lot of great sessions have covered pieces of it. In Office 365, there was a session that Mike McLean and Julie Collar had yesterday or 2 days ago, and on Monday. So that's kind of a more deep dive about Office 365. Chris Boyd had yesterday one about the architecture. So I'll touch base on one of those things. So first, gonna go with the big problem. And in 2010, the admin role was overloaded, and we got this feedback from our customers that whenever a new project server deployment was about to be installed, then SharePoint admins in those organizations had got cold feet. They didn't know what project server was. They heard that project was something on top of SharePoint, but they didn't know how to manage it. And part of the reason was that we had, with every PWA page, you had this big cluttered server settings page that had a bunch of settings, most of which are related to PMO type of things, such as set up custom fields and resource management, or workflow, status, stages. But others are things like queue settings, where you go and specify threads or how many retries. And it's like, what? I'm on PMO. I don't know these things. OLAP database management, where you set up analysis services and how do you connect and how do you have to trust those. So, or other things like set up bulk update project sites. those are the things that don't fit well on this page, which is more targeted to manage your PWA instance, your PWA site. So in 2013, we took that feedback and we wanted to separate better the PMO role and the SharePoint admin role. The SharePoint admin needs to go into central admin, and that's where they do stuff like create web applications, create service applications, proxies, hook them up, manage workloads. So for the PMO role, just like a PMO in SharePoint has the cogs menu, goes to site settings to create lists, libraries, create fields, and so on, we added a PWA settings menu over there. And there we left only with things like pertain to PMO type of work, like resource, manage your resource pool, or create custom fields and EPTs and so on and so forth. So next I'm going to talk more about what to do where, and if you are a Project Online admin, then the Office 365 portal is the place where you sign up. And that's where you create users and groups, you assign licenses, you manage your workloads, things like your Exchange deployment, your Link deployment, the SharePoint deployment. And then you are pretty much done. There is a SharePoint admin page on your Office 365, which is a simplified version of central admin. There you go and create manage site collections, manage your administrators, have settings around other SharePoint things such as SkyDrive Pro or InfoPath or BCS. And then you have the PWA settings once you are in your PWA instance where you manage permissions and your subsites or other settings from the screen we just saw before. When you are on-prem, then you have the SharePoint Central Admin, where you, as you know, you manage your project service application, you create proxies to connect your web application to your service application, you manage the queue, and this is new because queue is now global, and I'll talk about that more, and then set up things that you do it kind of like one time only, manage your all app, backup, restore, schedule, and things like that. With Project Online, now we have a set of features that are available on premise, and this is kind of the list. The big one is around reporting. If you're familiar with reporting in 2010 and 2013 on-prem, we allow direct access to the reporting schema, DBO. But when you go that online, then that's no longer possible. It would be a big security breach to give tenants access to our databases in our data centers. So for that, to mitigate that, we created a new data service. I won't go into details. There have been great sessions around reporting and OData and BI. So I recommend that you watch the recordings if you haven't seen them already. And then we also have OLAP cubes that are only available on premise. Backup and restore to the archive DB is another thing that's not available online. Setting up project sites in different site collections, and we realized that that is actually a more advanced features. We didn't have to put it there. And we made things easier now in SharePoint to integrate. And then all the service management that you get in Central Admin and the PowerShell commandlets to manage your deployments and set up front-end machines and back-end machines and so on. So now I'm going to go to a demo and see what I've been talking about. So once you sign up in Office 365, after you sign up, you're presented with this dashboard. So here, what you get is kind of the first page with the current health of the system, and welcome tour. Here, if you click on this link, this is where you can download the client, the Project Pro client, or if you have other Office 365 clients of Home Premium like Word, Excel. That's where you download them. This is kind of where you create users and groups. I have 3 users in my tenancies. You can set up federation with your on-prem Active Directory deployment, and then kind of all your users will show up here. And then licensing. And this is the subscription I have, 20 user licenses, and when it expires. I want to stop for a minute and talk about licensing because it confuses some people. We get these support calls every now and then with people that say, call the admins, or even CSS in our online. They said, I'm an admin and I just can't get to my project page. So it's a security issue of some sort. It turns out that more often than you would expect, it's a licensing issue. So the way it works is that when you log in, you enter your admin and password. In project, we look you up in SharePoint and you authenticate. So now we know who you are. And then if you're accessing a project page, we check the project license. And if you don't have one, then you're not allowed to get in. So customers get this screen that says, I couldn't get in. If you have the project license, then you can go in, and then we look your permissions, and we authorize. And we can give you an access denied if you try to access an admin settings, and if you are just a team member. So, and this is kind of holds true for other workloads for your Project Online tenancies. You could have 1,000 users that you sync from your AD, and then 500 have projects, 500 have Exchange. So it depends on what they're trying to access. They could get kicked out, and this is why. So now, moving on, this is kind of a service health where you can see if my tenancy is working great, of course. If there have been service degradations, interruptions. I won't go through all the details here. As I said, Mike McLean had a great session about Project Online as a new Office 365 offering. This is an interesting one, the service settings. And this is the site collections more going towards SharePoint. The site collections in my tenancy, I can go and create one, or if I click on projects, that should show site collections that have project. So if I go there, then what I see is the simplified version of Central Admin. So you have on the left different type of things you can manage: SkyDrive Pro, InfoPath, user profile. I won't go into there. This is most interesting for project. So you have the list of site collections, and these two here are special site collections that have project. So to do that, I created, you go to the new menu and you say private site collection with project web app, and what would go under the cover is, after I fill in all of these fields, is that something, a new provisioning job will kick off in the background, and then you'll get a new site collection. You can choose to add project to an existing site collection, and I'll talk more about why that's nice and how it happens. So I can do that and say, here's how we could add one. And then other things that you could change here. You could either remove or switch from one permission mode, which is the default, the SharePoint, to project permission mode, and back and forth. This is how you do it. It's a powerful feature, and if you attended yesterday's session around security, it goes into depth about what those features, what those settings are. One thing I want to mention is that you can, with your tenancy, you get three PWA instances in your maximum. So here it says that, so I have 2, and then I have 0 available, and I filled my quota. Does anybody know where my third is? Or why I don't have 3? No? Okay. Well, that's because I deleted it. So it's in the recycle bin. Recycle bin is the place where you could delete a site collection, and there is a 30-day retention policy after which it is completely destroyed. So that's what I did. I have 23 days left to restore it if I still need it. From the central admin, from this SharePoint admin center, you can go on and see the properties and navigate. If I click on here, it should get me to the home page for this site. And this is how I'm now in PWA. And then if I need to manage it, then it's just like on-prem. I go to the settings menu. Another interesting feature that we did for the other setting is that this EPM site was actually a team site that I added project to. So I just navigated right here. You can see from the URL, it's EPM, and then it's not PWA. And then if I go to site content, there are a bunch of sub-sites. That is from the scenario where I created a SharePoint site collection. I started to play with it. I created new 2 team sites, and then I wanted to add project to have more insight into what people are working on in my site collection. And then to do that, I just went to tenant admin, created PWA, which is just a sub-web here. It's not, you can see sites EPM/PWA. So it's kind of just another web that looks green. So next, I'm going to show you, are there any questions with Office 365? They're handled with pools. So the question was around how are they handled. You could go to that page that I showed and grab a license from someone and give it to someone else, as long as you stay within your cap of 20 licenses. Yes? Yeah. Correct, yeah. If you want, yes, you create a new site collection, and PWA is just like a web that gives you, that has a database on the back end, and then it gives you insight. Yeah. All right. So next, I want to show you how you manage things in central admin. I think this is very familiar to most of you because most of you are SharePoint admins. So let's say that you are a SharePoint admin and then you install Project Server. Then what do you do? Well, one of the first things you want to do is go to the Managed Service application and create a new service applications. I have one already here. And then you can go and create one. And this is just pure SharePoint. We just plug in nicely into that screen. So you can give it a name, create an app pool if you want, and so on and so forth. Then you would go to manage your servers, and this is the local machine, and make sure that here the project server application service is started on this particular machine. So when that happens, there are 3 interesting entity services that start running. These are the project calculation service, eventing service, and the queue service. The second and the third one should be familiar. We had them before. The new one is a calculation service, and it handles our scheduling engine on the server. Chris Boyd had a great talk yesterday about how that it's all set up, so I won't go into details. Then if you are into the managed service application page, you go and manage your PWA settings to see all your PWA instances on that machine. So I now created 3. There is a new button that we put here. This is to manage the queue settings for the project web app. So previously, you had queue settings for each PWA instance. And we did a bunch of work in 2013 to improve the scale of our system now that we're moving online. And we realized that having a dedicated queue per instance would just not scale. So we decided to invest in the performance and the scale of the queue service, and then created, if there's only one queue that runs per farm, and it services all the requests for all your project instances. And here, this is where it makes sense to have this page, not in PWA admin. That's where you set up how many threads you want per core, retry interval, and so on and so forth. There's another menu we introduced in 2013 to manage, here, if I select an instance, I can go on and manage this particular instance. And I'm now presented with the settings that previously were on the server settings page, along with other PMO settings, and didn't make sense there. Things like set up the workflow user proxy, and all app database management. Then you can go on and create the project web instance. That's the page where you can create a new one. I already have 3. Nothing has really changed here, except that we are now only one database, and more on it in a bit. So previously, you had to set up 3 database names and database servers up to 2, but now there's only 1. So that concludes my central admin demo. Okay, let's go move back to the slide. Any questions? Yes? Yes. Yes. Correct. It's kind of a SharePoint setting that you have in SharePoint when you create a site collection, because we have our own create site collection with project page. We brought in some of those settings, and then we passed those into the content database to manage the site collection quota. Yes? I was referring to project licenses. So in 2013, we added the licensing, and it also shows on-prem. But yeah, it was how, and I guess it's a valid answer for licensing in general, because you could, the same things like exchange license or link license, depending on your plan or subscription, kind of the same rule apply. Yes.
But maybe you've got 700 people that may need it, and thereby you don't buy 700 licenses, you buy 500.
I guess you could do that. The way you would do, the way I would see this work is, you have 700 people, but not all of them need project. Right. So you only give 200 project, and then everybody has an exchange, and they license, and they get a mailbox. And then errors happen when someone that only has an exchange mailbox clicks on a link or in an email that gets them to the project license, to a project page, and then they can't access it because they're not licensed. That's what I meant.
That's right, but I think the question is, in that scenario where you have 200 people that need project, and you buy 150
Yes.
Is that okay?
Uh,
As long as you don't have more than 150 people accessing?
yeah, that would be okay. Yeah, that would be okay. Yeah. So you're talking about the stuff that we announced at the keynote. Then, so that will. I know a little bit about it, but that will be in like another option that you purchase or another plan that you can purchase, and it will show up with a list of subscriptions. So you could have 20 Project Pro licenses and then 100 Project Lite licenses, and then you can assign them out from a pool. All right. Yes. Yes. Okay. So this is the minimum software requirements. I stole this slide from Chris Boyd's presentation from yesterday. So those of you that saw it yesterday is the same one. I'm going to go fast through it. We require Windows Server, SQL Server, SharePoint Enterprise as our kind of basics. We are the first version that is fully cross-browser. You can access PWA with latest version of Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and IE8 and later. In 2010, only team member scenarios like My Task or timesheets were supported cross-browser, and that's only if you had SP1. Project Professional on Windows 7 or 8 is required to do the project client to server connectivity. We have Exchange Server. Optionally, there are some scenarios where you could send out your tasks from the status page, and they could show up in Exchange, or on the phone. You could we have full scenario that would go up to your phone, and then you can check them on your phone, and then they will show up as complete in project. Link, as you saw at the demo, the keynote, we integrated with the presence control. The green jelly bean shows up. We saw it on the client. It shows up on the server in pages that display resources, such as Resource Center. And that's kind of our basics. Next, that's also something that Chris covered at depth, so I'll go fast. Project Server architecture, we have the SQL layer, the app tier, the front end, then the clients. The browser, Project Professional, we have PowerShell to manage, and more on that in a bit. You could have third-party applications that connect to project through PSIs or SharePoint apps, because we now support CSOM. It will show up in a bit. So on the front end, what we have is ASPX pages, the web services, the WCF endpoints for third-party apps, CSOM for if you want to, it's a new endpoint, a new programmability model, and Bill Avery and covers it with Chris Givens. Covered it this morning at 9 o'clock in depth about Project Server extensibilities. They have great apps. OData, that's our new endpoint for reporting, is a REST API. This is something new. Business objects now can be processed on the front end. Previously, in 2010, with every request, there would be a forwarder that would take the request and then forward it to the app tier that did all the business logic. And there was an extra hop and serialization between the two tiers. And in our perf measurements, we saw that is a perf hit. It takes actually longer for normal page browsing to serialize the request between the tiers than it is to actually do the work once you get the request. So we do a bunch of processes of processing of the workload on the front end. And Chris yesterday covered how you want to set up, how many front ends and machines you want to have to set up in your farm to scale that. This is just before. Forwarder would forward to the app tier for things that are more intensive, things that happen in the queue, where you have our NT services running, the calc service, the workflow, the eventing service. We now support remote event receivers and Azure workflows for online. They also work on-prem if you want to set them up so. And on the SQL level, this is a new thing. In 2010, there were 4 databases. Now there's only 1. And we did a bunch of work on upgrade to consolidate from the 4 databases into a new one, the 5th, that has all the same tables with different schemas to tell them apart. And then we have the SharePoint content database and the config database. The config database is where SharePoint stores the service application, the proxies, the web apps, and everything. And the content DB is where you have the workspaces and everything in SharePoint. That workflows, PDPs, that are not in the project DB. What's new for the admin? Well, we have a simplified storage architecture, only 1 database. We did that mainly for cost, because now we're running an online service. So it costs more to carry 4 databases around. That's one thing. Another thing is it simplifies things like backups and point-in-time restore, because it's very hard to get like snapshots of exact timestamp when everything is. It's so much better to have a single container. We improved the management via PowerShell commandlets, so everything is now scripted. We recommend that admins set up SharePoint and project instance with PowerShell. You can do things in central admin, but if you want to if you're a hosted server or hosted solution, then PowerShell is your friend. We have a better integration with the SharePoint architecture, where you could create a PWA as a new site collection, just like 2010, or you could add project to an existing site collection. And you saw that in my online demo earlier, where I had that EPM site, and then project was just a new thing there. We work great on improving the performance and scalability. We did things like share the queue, and the others, such as eventing and calculation, are 1 per farm. And we realized that that is easier to manage, and it gives us better performance. So on the PMO side of things, we have a simplified security mode that is on by default for news tenancies. We realized that in 2013, we realized that customers were not using project, and security was a big blocker. They didn't need, not all of them needed the flexibility of categories and groups and dynamic permissions and RBS. Some of them use SharePoint. They just wanted to use SharePoint to quickly share their sites. So we created this simplified security mode. That's for the grow-up scenario. And yesterday it was covered in depth by Nadine and Michael. And that allows you to add users easily and grow up from SharePoint. As I mentioned on the next slide. The problem that we had was with adding project was that you had to be a new site collection. That has certain drawbacks, that users and groups in SharePoint are at the site collection level. That's the boundary. If you create a new site collection, you got to set it all up. Users that are already in SharePoint didn't have that. Then people were using SharePoint and had their workspaces, and then you added project as a site collection. You had to configure all of those workspaces to point in a different site collection and all that overhead. And it was just a pain. Existing users that are in SharePoint, if they're added to special project server groups, they are sunk automatically in SharePoint permission mode. We also added a new feature to quickly create projects from SharePoint lists. Julie covered this in her session about how to get started and create projects quickly. But basically, the idea is that if you have a SharePoint task list, there's a scenario that you could create from a list item there, a project in project server, and then kick off a workflow and funnel it through all the approval process until it becomes a real project. Now, management. Project is our first online offering. So we had to think about cloud first. COGS was a big deal. We care now how much it costs to run the service. So we focused on reducing COGS and simplifying management. Things that consolidating from 4 databases to 1 database was a COGS reduction. That was kind of the first driver we had there. We realized that if you have 100 instances or more in a SharePoint farm, having 4 times the number of databases and managing mirroring for high availability and backups and all of that would just not scale. We need to work with large data sets and focus on page performance. These are kind of the improvements we did in perf. We used to have what we call the Boston scenario. Us living in Redmond, we're looking at how long it takes to download a page that is hosted on a Boston server. And that is to emulate the real internet scenario that the clouds kind of pushes on us. Before, everything is on-prem, so there's the LAN scenario, everything the high bandwidth. But now we looked at the average bandwidth in the US, and I believe it was 120 milliseconds latency and 1 megabit as of 2012. And then we added in our perf tests that latency and see how much it actually takes to download the homepage. Chris Elwell has this time a session around performance called Project Server Supercharged. He talks about this in great depth, so you can watch this recording. I highly recommend how, if you need guidance about how to set up your deployment on-prem and how to optimize things. These are the numbers. This is an animated PowerPoint about comparatively the improvement of performance when loading the home page. So we did things like re-architecting the JavaScript to make use of the full bandwidth, all the ports the browser opens, so they are all filled up, and make sure that all of the JavaScript is cached and images get cached and not downloaded with every request, reducing the number of SQL calls that we make to load the page, and so on and so forth. With the project storage, we have project server databases in 2010 and 1 content database. I want to put it out there. People overlook that, but content database is also very important because if you don't carry it over when you move from dev test to deployment, then you lose all the workflow customization, PDPs, and all that. So now we only have 1. And then a topology overview. I want to cheat for a second and switch back to my demo because I'm going to kick off a PowerShell script that creates an instance. And then it takes about 5 minutes. So I want to walk you through the slides of what it does. So let me this is to create a new project instance that is not at the root, and then you will see what I'm doing. So let's call this Alex demo. So while that's running, I'm going to go back here and talk about the topology overview. When you set a farm, you do things like set up, install SharePoint, set up Excel services, set up search, for example, and then you start creating web applications, site collections, and you start using. Then you add project service into the mix. And then you did the steps that I showed you. You create a proxy, you create a service application, and then you want to use project to add PWA. So how does it know? We know that project creates an extra database, but then how does it know that this is in this site collection and it talks to this service application? So when you create a project instance, a project site, we create what we internally call a project web instance. It's the logical coupling between the site collection, the database, and the project service. And that is something, an object that is stored in the config DB, and it's very useful for management. So project web instance, I talked, logical connection between the service, the database, and the content side. The project service application, if you think about the persistent object hierarchy in SharePoint, is the parent of the web instance object that maintains the collection. Share services, the queue, the eventing, the PCS, query the project service application to process requests. That's how the queue knows. It goes to the service application and talks to it and says, give me all the sites that have project so I can go and service the requests. And we created this PWA site collection feature that does all the magic. That's how it's all set up. So how do you create one? Well, you can use the familiar web interface to set it all up. But what that does under the cover is, if you create a new one at the root, then you do new site collection, SP site, using the PWA #0 template. So that will give you a URL like Contoso sites PWA. Then you go and create a new project database, and it's just sitting there. It's uninitialized. And it's attached to the SP databases. And then you make the association of the two. So you enable this feature of PWA site or the site collection. And this is when we kick off on the feature activation handler. We kick off and populate all the groups and custom fields and out-of-the-box workflows and so on. In PowerShell, 3 easy steps. New SP site with a template, new SP project database, and then enable feature PWA site at the site collection level. Now, if you want to add PWA to an existing site collection for the growing up scenario that I just talked about, then there's an extra step. So you create a new site collection. You notice the template STS0. It's a team site. You use it. You create workspaces, list documents. Then you want to add project. So you create a new PWA site, SP Web, with a PWA #0 template, and then create the same new project database and associate them by enabling the feature. How it works in PowerShell, the first two are just SharePoint commandlets, new SP site, new SP Web. You can see the URL. You just add it after. New SP project database, and then you enable the feature at the site collection level, not at PWA. PWA is just the web that looks green from the SharePoint admin's perspective. Everything is at the site collection level. So now, let's go on and see if it's all done. I just follow those 4 steps that I had in PowerShell. So this is the script I was using. There are a bunch of kind of collateral here, but the key things are new SP site, then down there, new SP Web, new SP project database, and then enable feature. If you like PowerShell, if you do get SP site, that will list this is my site over here that I just created. This is a SharePoint commandlet that gives you all the site collection. But we also created a get SP project web instance commandlet that tells you all the project web instances. This is ours. So it gives you more information around things like, OK, this is the URL, this is the DB, its provision and authentication, and so on and so forth. You can see that in the GetSP database, our database shows up as mounted on the farm. These are the project one with a different type. These are the content ones. They have WSS in the title. That's pretty much it. I can see if I refresh this page, my new instance should show up here. And then let's just browse to it. So I created, the site was HTTP, Alex demo. Okay, so it's a SharePoint site. Working on it. So that's a SharePoint site. If I go to site contents, the PWA should be just another subsite here. And I see it, and then I can go and browse to it. Now, since we're here in PowerShell, I just want to go over other things, such as pausing the website. This is useful when you do upgrade. We now support N-1 and read-only. So you could do pause SP project web instance. Pause SP project web. Oh, it's not working. Dash identity HTTP. Okay. So when I do that, we mark the project site as read-only internally. And that allows SharePoint admins to perform upgrades while their users can still access and browse to the site. If I go to this site and now I refresh the home page, there should be a yellow bar here that will tell me that the site is read-only. And we did a bunch of work to disable all of the save buttons and create buttons. If someone tried to create a project, then we intercept that and disable it. That allows you to perform updates and not give downtime or give limited downtime to your customers. If I'm done with my update, I can resume, and then that flag should be off. If I now refresh, the page should be, the site should still return to normal. And if I try to create a project, the dialog should just work. Okay. All right. So, PowerShell overview. These are kind of the set of the commandlets that we have. We have the documentations there on TechNet. The main ones are around project service application, how to create one. It creates a proxy. It connects to the first web application. How to create the project database or upgrade or mount it if you need to install a CU or move it from one staging server to another. The project web instance concept, that is the glue between all those entities in SharePoint. Get SP project web instance, we saw that. Then if you need to do an upgrade, you need to use mount, dismount, upgrade, and so on and so forth. There are other management commandlets to set up permission mode, set up the queue settings, the PCS settings, or data paging threads, and so on and so forth. This is kind of upgrade overview. We are now on project database. If you're still running 2007, then earlier versions can be upgraded. You have to upgrade through 2010, and then we'll convert them into one database using the special PowerShell commandlet. We now support N-1. You can, if you need to deploy a CU, you can do that quickly, and then you don't have to upgrade the database until later. That is in line with what SharePoint had for a while. We added support for that. Read-only, we just saw that. Earlier today at 10:30, Nadine Merali had a session about upgrade. He goes in depth about how to upgrade the content DBs, how to make sure all the visuals get over, and so on and so forth. So there's documentation on TechNet over there. So now, any questions on PowerShell? Yes?
Put it on pause. Who has the upgrade? Like, is it farm admins or it's
So because it's a PowerShell, you need to be a farm admin to be able to run any PowerShell commandlet. So typically, the SharePoint admin, if an upgrade is coming up, they would kind of announce it, set everything to read-only, and then upgrade over the weekend. What we do there is that allows you to take machines out of rotation, patch them, put them back in the farm, and you know that at least users can browse to the site. They won't be able to create it. That flag that we listen to, also the queue listens to. So if the queue will stop processing any jobs. It will just pause. And then after upgrade, it will resume.
it'll unpause itself?
Yes. Yeah. And we also listen sometimes. Some admins will not use this commandlet. They would just mark the database as read-only in SQL Management Studio. We listen to that every time there is a write attempt. We catch the SQL exception that SQL gives, and then if it's a read-only exception, then we turn on this flag. So we don't recommend that you do that because users will get unhappy. It's like, it was working fine, I hit save, and then this yellow bar showed up. So kind of better to have more prep work. But yeah. All right. So moving on, monitoring and telemetry enhancements. What Office 365 has brought us? Well, to tell you a story, Project Server 2010 was not internet ready. And how did we find out? Well, at the beginning of 2013, we knew that we wanted to go online. But we didn't know how good we were or how bad we were. So internally at Microsoft, we have our internal site. It was an on-prem deployment at the time, but the Office folks were administering it as if it were an online. So it was a lockdown environment. They would manage all the deployments, and if something went wrong, you couldn't debug it or get the database to look at the data. So we realized that we need to troubleshoot using ULS and logs. So we invested a great deal in improving the quality of the logging. We integrated with developer dashboard that shows how our queries perform in real time in SharePoint. We knew that we would have limited access to the database. You cannot just see the customer data. That would be PII. So we have these diagnostic views that I will show in a bit. The tools that we use, ULS Viewer, that's a great tool for analyzing the logs. It provides filtering capabilities. You can download. Has anyone used ULS Viewer? Okay. It's great, right? Developer dashboard. Is anyone familiar with that? Yeah. Well, now it works for project as well. Previously, project SQL calls or service calls would not be captured. We invested to integrate into those. It can analyze web requests, service requests, SQL calls, and I think I have it set up on my demo. We'll try it out. That's where you download it from. Diagnostic views. Well, diagnostic views are some SQL views that we create for every table in the project DB, and we scrub all the sensitive fields. All the text fields are hashed, datetime fields, we only leave basically GUIDs there. That can be secure because it's a SQL view, can be secure separately from the core tables. And if you care about security in your organization, then you could make that security setting and give access to the diag views only to the IT admin and they could troubleshoot what's going on, but not see the real data. So you could see in SQL management there is a diag view for every table, the schema diag.pub _ table name, and if you select from it, then this is what the projects table looks like. So project name is scrubbed. You can only see GUI, and author is also scrubbed in this one. Developer dashboard can be configured from the central admin. It's enabled as a feature of the content service. It allows you to catch things like web requests. So on this page, this is what happens when you browse to Project Center. These are the requests. And then I just showed the SQL calls and how long they took, the name of the sprox, duration. Data is you need to create a usage DB, WSS logging, and that aggregates all the data from the logs, and they are inserted there. So let's see. Yeah, that's kind of my session recap. We talked about Office 365 admin, SharePoint PMO admin, management, monitoring. Any questions we could use? Yes?
Yes, then we heard that the ease of the PSI interface are limited. This is true?
We try to, we encourage people to move away from PSIs. We still support them. I think there's a 1 or 2 version promise that will support them, but we want people to start to moving away from them because the technology is just kind of old, especially around ASMX web services.
Maybe in the next version there will be no PSI.
So the next on-prem version will still have PSI because there's a process for deprecating. You have to deprecate them and then you have to remove them. So they kind of carry over for at least 1 more version before you announce that they're not supported. But yes?
Developer dashboard you mentioned, does it work only for 2013 or?
No, it's actually let's see if it works on my VM. It's actually a SharePoint feature. So for SharePoint, it works on 2010, but for project, actually, I think I had it on here, yeah. So for project, we only added support in 2013, but it's been there in SharePoint. So here, when you load the project, this is the request, the monitor scope. Let's just make this bigger. The monitor scopes, the SQL, sprox, and I can still see service calls if I'm making service calls from the front end to the app tier. And this is kind of real time. You pop it out from here. That kind of how you do it from the top right corner. And then let's just see if it's still enabled. So now I'm trying to reload the home page, and then it intercepted the request to the home page. I can see the scope, the monitor scopes. SharePoint got it. It redirected to the default page. This is what SharePoint did to load the page from the web part. At the SQL level, there were like 1 SharePoint request to the content database to load the web part page from the content DB, and then our 2 sprox to authenticate and to authenticate the user, and then show up this reminder web part. If I go to Project Center, then that should show me the request that I made asynchronously to the backend, to the app tier, and then the SPX page, and then the JavaScript call. I can go into more internals of how the page Project Center actually loads. But this is very useful for us to troubleshoot. And whenever a developer checks in a feature, we ask them to look here and make sure that you're not making extra service calls and you're not making extra SQL calls that you don't need, and that's to improve performance. So, yeah, that's there. Yes?
Sorry, is it possible to use the developer dashboard with the communication from project professional and project server? So if you open project professional now and try to open a project, the developer dashboard can be used to track
I think you can use that, or I recommend using Fiddler for that. If you want to track the traffic that goes between the client and the server, then Fiddler is great for monitoring HTTP traffic. I think developer dashboard here is only to this web session, so probably not. I don't know how to do that. So if I'm browsing in this Alex demo session, it wouldn't capture those things here. Or maybe it does. I'm not sure. I can follow up and see. Yeah. All right. So we still have. Oh, sorry about that. I had something else I wanted to show you around ULS. Have you used ULS Viewer? You said a few things. So for those that are not familiar, I have ULS Viewer here at the on the desktop. That's the tool I downloaded. It looks like this. I can open the logs from the log folder, open from ULS. It's the SharePoint tracer service that handles all the ULS log entries. So you got to make sure that that's turned on. So I have it here. It's called, on the Services tab, SPTrace v4. It's running. That's the anti-service that handles all of that. So I have already opened it for the log file. Just going to go really quickly on a case study here. Somebody created a project and they got an error. They think the project name already existed, but they weren't sure. I can grab the logs. I can look for project name. I see this error here. It says project name doesn't exist. What I like to do is filter by correlation. So I can create a new tab in ULS Viewer, and I filter. I choose the correlation ID, the GUID. And another improvement we did in 2013 is that from when the request is initiated on the front end, it can go into multiple machines on the front end, the queue, the app tier, and we made sure that the same correlation UID is persisted for the duration of the request. So here I can see and go what the user has been doing and how they got the error. I can filter if I'm not interested in noise. I can just keep only high things, or I have an unexpected error here. Search service is not installed. Yes, it's not installed. I didn't install search. And then it's a great tool for diagnosis. Switching back to my slides, that's the recap. We saw the admin, management, diagnostics, related content. So I talked about introducing Project Online. Mike McLean goes in depth about what Project Online is and what it is good for. How to get started. Julie had a great session yesterday. She also led 4 hands-on labs, I believe, on Monday and Tuesday about how to sign up, create projects. The architecture talk that Chris gave yesterday goes more into how the front ends and the back ends and the queue work and all the architecture improvements we made in 2013. Lastly, not least, Chris Solwell has at this time a session dedicated to performance, scalability, and all the improvements we made in 2013. So my last slide, please make sure to evaluate the session. Thank you for coming. and I can take more questions. I think we still have a few minutes. But yeah, on the MPC, they should become available for recording. Yeah. All right.
PWA is creating its own database,
Yes.
and that can't be split up like between two content databases, correct? Or
No, because it's one per site collection. So you already have a site collection somewhere in a content DB, and then when you create a project DB, then that will be associated to that content DB through the project web instance concept that I showed you. That's kind of holds them together.
is there any load balancing for the database?
Load balancing. What do you mean?
Like for example, you have you can scale out your front-end layer, app layer.
Yes.
But is there any similar option for database server layer?
I'm not sure about that. If there is, then it would be on. No, it's not really, because when you create a project database, then you specify the server name and the database name. You specify. We do have a placement logic when you create it online to make sure that it's spread out across all servers. So that we've done that logic internally. For the database, so when you create a project database online, we know where your tenancy is in which data center, and then we have logic to place your DB onto one of the kind of the list to balance them out. But you can move it around, but yeah. No, not really. No. Yeah, that you can do. Yeah. 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 We only did those things online because online you cannot ask the user to specify a server name. It's like, yeah, you're right. Yes.
This is realized on the rights layer. Only you said this only SharePoint farm admins are allowed to perform upgrades in the background.
No, I said, or what I meant was SharePoint farm admins can run PowerShell.
Okay.
You require, even to access and browse to the central admin UI, you have to be a farm admin. Right? That's as far as I know. So the same if you need to run PowerShell from the command line, the user that is running it has to be, that session has to be under farm privileges account.
Okay. No one else is allowed to write. Only PowerShell instance with farm admins are allowed to enter commands.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's in line with SharePoint, I think. From SharePoint. We follow the... Correct. Correct. Yes.
Is it like logical separation or is it a physical separation that
So there's a logic in between SharePoint and project. It's a logical separation. We are developers in the same team. We work on the same code base. It's just the business folks come in and say, SharePoint sells as a different SKU with these conditions, and project is on top of it. But in terms of how it's deployed online, it's on the same farms, the same bits running. On the other hand, Exchange and Link are actually separate from SharePoint. Yeah, but project and SharePoint are the same. Yeah.
that's where the Office 365 comes first then?
Correct. Right, and you saw that when I went to SharePoint, let me just go on again. So when I went here to the SharePoint Admin Center, this is all SharePoint, and they are logically separate, but they are kind of in the same logical thing in our data center. But when you go to Office 365, this tenancy I don't think has exchanged, but here you could set up kind of things like other things that are separate.
So when we install SharePoint,
Yes.
do we see on-premise? When I install SharePoint on-premise, what are the project server purposes?
Yeah.
Do I still see this?
No. That's only for hosted. Yeah, you would see central admin. We kind of had to redesign the central admin because we cannot just give you central admin online to turn on things front ends, right? It doesn't make sense. You would see, yeah, it's just central admin. Any capability for what? Sorry? Auditing? Not really. What do you mean exactly? In terms of normal project usage, like who created the project and resources, nothing that we had before. Project owner, or there are some columns in the database created by resource and last modified by resource. Those are still there.
Sometimes it captures from the template, not the...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They have to go back
And change it. Yeah, that's... yeah, we haven't fixed that, I don't think we fixed that, or maybe, I don't know.
Any upgrades on the department view? You have a department view to logically separate multiple
Yes.
departments, right?
Yeah.
We saw like 2010 ads on, I feel it's an issue, but I don't know if there is any way to fix it. Like you can differentiate fields at the project level, task level, and resource level.
Yes.
When you are in project for offline, when you open the project information, all the custom fields will be grouped by the department. They are grouped in admin side.
Yes.
Same thing happens in the resource information window also. But that won't happen in the task information.
I see. Yeah, I don't think we changed any of that. I think it's still the same. Department is it's a logical kind of a org hierarchy. You could set it up, but I know that we haven't gone all the way and do security around it or in other separations that, yeah, we still the same. Yeah. Oh. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and